Friends, welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. Carrie and I got married 6 years ago. In these stories, everyone describes their wife as something exceptional, and I can understand that because I've had time to think about it. My wife, Carrie, was a real beauty, without a doubt. Exceptional? I don't know. Beautiful, slender. Judge for yourself. I know I liked her. I've known Carrie for a long time, ever since we were teenagers. I was a few years older than her, so to me she was always just a young girl from the street. And when she turned 14, something happened that seemed to seal our relationship. I was just about to go to university and was returning home after an evening at the pub. It wasn't too late, but it was already getting dark when I turned into the local park. Perhaps it was for the best, because I came across a young Carrie who was being molested by a couple of boys her age. I say molested, but it was much more serious, and if I hadn't shown up at that moment, who knows what might have happened. She always thought that I, as a hero, rushed into battle and saved her, but in fact, as soon as I ran into two guys, they got scared and left. In any case, I became someone special to her, and for the rest of the summer she tried to stay in my sight, not just following me everywhere, but doing her best to be wherever I was. My friends, of course, made fun of me, because at 18 I was too old for her, but even then I had to admit that she was a very beautiful girl, and even at that age she had an excellent pair of long, slender legs. Then I went away to study for 3 years and hardly saw her until I returned after graduation and spent a long summer at home before going to a new job. By that time, of course, she was 18 and I was almost 22. It was a completely different matter, and combined with what a beautiful young woman she had turned into, it made her constant attachment to me extremely acceptable. We got together and became friends and walked hand in hand in the park, kissing and hugging at every opportunity. I'm sure Carrie fell in love with me even more that summer, and to tell you the truth, I fell in love with her too. But this was not to be, and despite the open discussion of other possibilities, we sadly parted. She went to Leeds University, and I went to my first serious job in Bristol. We couldn't have been much further apart. She swore to be faithful to me, but I was skeptical about it. I myself had just spent 3 years as a student and was well aware of how things change and what temptations arise. I visited her several times, but the last time it was absolutely obvious that she had a different life that captured her, and we just drifted apart. Of course, it was like that, because I didn't slow down myself, turning into a party boy on the Bristol stage for several years and going through a series of different girls. But then I changed my plans a little, got closer to home, and Carrie came back into my life. By that time, she had already graduated from university and was working when her parents invited me to visit. I must say that dear Carrie's first greeting was not at all as warm as I expected, but soon everything changed. She has really changed, matured, become more sophisticated, wise of core. It was like that, because I didn't slow down myself, turning into a party boy on the Bristol stage for several years and going through a series of different girls. But then I changed my plans a little, got closer to home, and Carrie came back into my life. By that time, she had already graduated from university and was working when her parents invited me to visit. I must say that dear Carrie's first greeting was not at all as warm as I expected, but soon everything changed. She has really changed, matured, become more sophisticated, wiser. And yes, she lost her virginity, and unfortunately not with me. However, it doesn't matter, and who was I to complain? One night she said that I was still her special hero, and we seemed to be back to where we left off. Marriage followed as morning follows night. And 6 years later, we still loved each other as much as ever. Carrie was a bit of a prude sometimes. She didn't approve of everything, but she never went overboard, so it wasn't a problem. We were happy, really happy, and the future looked bright. My problem started when my company decided to promote me. No, the problem was not the promotion, but the fact that I was sent to the beautiful city of Leeds, where my loving wife spent years studying at university. Either there or the Middle East, and since we wanted children, Leeds seemed more reasonable. There were no problems there either, at least for the first couple of weeks. While we were looking for an apartment and settling, there were no problems there either, at least for the couple of weeks. While we were looking for an apartment and settling in, I knew that I would miss Arsenal football, and Leeds City is unlikely to replace them in my sympathies. After all, Billy Bremner and his team have long since retired. but on the whole, Leeds seemed like a good place to me. If you are not already aware, this is a very lively city with a vibrant nightlife. One evening, she suggested that we take a short tour of the city and look at several places that she often visited as a student. We had drinks in several student pubs, but even Carrie felt a little out of place, because it had been 8 years since she graduated from Leeds University. We ate at the restaurant where she worked for a while, but she didn't find anyone she remembered there either. Even the decoration had changed, and it was obvious that she was a little disappointed in the evening. He just didn't have the magic she'd hoped for. It's strange that such a small thing as remodeling an institution since you were there the last time can disappoint a person so much. The evening seemed to end badly. I know, she finally announced. There was a small pub on the outskirts of the city where I worked in my last year. It wasn't a student pub, so maybe some of the locals are still here. It was still early evening, so we walked hand in hand through the city center like two lovers, not bothering about the car, until finally it took me through some alleys, and the character of the bit was still early evening. So we walked hand in hand through thinter like two lovers, not bothering about the car, until finally it took me through some alleys, and the character of the buildings began to change. From bright city lights to shabby backyard houses and abandoned workshops. Was that really the case here in your time? I asked Carrie doubtfully, and she laughed, saying that nothing had changed. She lived nearby in a cheap apartment that she shared with 3 other girls, one of whom worked for a while in the same pub as her. Right around this corner, she finally told me, and the joy in her voice was so obvious that it made me break into a smile. There was a gloomy pub in front of us, which I would not have thought of going into myself, no matter how Carrie was dressed. She certainly wasn't dressed promiscuously or anything like that, it just wasn't her style. Carrie was the epitome of a smart professional, from her neatly styled dark hair to her smart suits and high-heeled shoes. This evening she certainly wasn't dressed promiscuously or anything like that, it just wasn't her style. Carrie was the epitome of a smart professional, from her neatly styled dark hair to her smart suits and high-heeled shoes. This evening was an exception, and she wore a short skirt. Not very short, but bolder for her than usual. I joked that maybe it reminded her of her college days, but after thinking about it, I decided that maybe she already had plans for how the evening would end. I didn't know then that I would never treat that smile the same way again. I followed her inside, and she was right. The interior was old-fashioned but fairly clean, with a long dark wood bar and a lovely old mirror behind it. And the windows, which looked so dirty from the outside, actually looked great from the inside, as the light from the streetlights filtered through them, giving the bar a warm glow. Carrie stood as if spellbound, and finally recognition showed on her face. Nothing has changed, she said quietly, addressing no one. I don't think that anything has changed much in the last 50 years either, I added, which made her giggle and squeeze my hand as she looked at me lovingly. Oh, look, Terry, look. And she left, letting go of my hand and running to the other end of the bar. Hi, do you remember me? I heard her say to the bartender, who turned to look at her. He looked her up and down, assessing the pretty young woman standing in front of him. Then a smile appeared on his face as he recognized the one who had just greeted him. Carrie, he exclaimed. Is that really you, Carrie? Carrie stood and nodded her head in confirmation, smiling broadly at the tall, lanky bartender, whose name I never found out. I couldn't help but smile myself, realizing that Carrie had finally found someone who remembered her, and the evening wouldn't be wasted after all. He let out a cry of joy and ran out from behind the counter, took Carrie in his arms, hugged her tightly and kissed her on the lips. Those hugs and kisses didn't last long enough for me to get jealous or something, but the first uneasy feeling slid coldly through my gut, removing the smirk from my face. They were talking animatedly about things I didn't know anything about, and I was waiting to be introduced. The conversation turned to people Carrie obviously knew back then, and I was still waiting in vain for an introduction. When another guy entered the pub, the bartender called out to him and told him to come over and see who was there. He walked right past me and shouted, "Carrie," as soon as he noticed her. I had to put up with my wife being hugged and kissed by a man I had never seen before. I waited in vain for an introduction again. "Carl's coming any minute, Carrie," the other guy told her, and to my surprise, she blushed. "I think this will get you hooked," he added, seeing her reaction. Really? Carrie replied. Does Carl still come here? Is he really going to be here soon? Who the hell is Carl? Carrie had never mentioned Carl before. Of course she didn't have to, but I didn't like the way the evening was going, and I didn't like the fact that she was ignoring me either. I was left standing alone, feeling like a backup asshole. I cleared my throat to get her attention, and when that failed, I coughed loudly. The bartender looked back at me, but Carrie continued to ignore me, deep in conversation with another man. Sorry, buddy, the bartender said to me. I'll be with you in a minute. What could I do? I could have gone over and grabbed her hand or something, but she was so obviously excited about meeting her old friends that I decided to wait, went to the bar right behind them and leaned on the counter. Yes, buddy, the bartender finally said, breaking away from my wife. What will you drink? A pint of the best beer, please, I told him, and whatever the lady wants. The smile left the bartender's face when I said that. I don't think this little lady accepts drinks from just anyone, mister, he grumbled, obviously completely unaware that I was her husband, or that she was with me at all. I think she'll have a drink with me, I replied, starting to lose my temper. Listen, buddy, the bartender began. You can't come in here. However, he did not have time to finish as Carrie turned around. The raised voices finally caught her attention and interrupted him. It's okay. He's with me, she informed the other two casually, not bothering to even look at me. The bartender stopped talking, but he was still frowning as he took out my beer. That'll be £2.20, he demanded, pushing a glass across the counter toward me. And a drink for the lady? I asked. On the house, he informed me rudely, then quickly asked what she wanted and poured her a drink without looking back at me. I stood there sipping my pint and wondering what the hell was going on. My wife was still deep in conversation with the other two, laughing and giggling, telling old stories, and they were telling her about what had happened since she left. I noticed that Carl's name came up several times, and each time Carrie flashed an anxious smile. She still continued to completely ignore me, and I was already starting to get upset about her strange behavior. I was about to step between them to get my wife's attention back when the pub door burst open and two burly guys, one of whom was white and the other was Jamaican, barged in. Hey, Carl, the bartender shouted as soon as he noticed them. Look who's here. So this was the mysterious Carl? He's a big guy, and he looks tough. Carl stopped dead in his tracks when he noticed Carrie, and his face broke into a wide smile. Where did you come from? Without saying another word, he rushed past me and, when the others stepped out of his way, grabbed her and hugged her, and Carrie returned his kiss with the same enthusiasm with which he kissed her. This time, in my opinion, it went on for too long, and the way the others stood and beamed at the two of them when they were pressed together didn't help either. Then his left hand came down on her back and cupped her buttock. I've had enough. I stepped forward to interrupt this, deciding that if Carrie was allowing herself to do this and wasn't even introducing me to her friends, then it was time for us to leave. I had only managed to take one step when I was suddenly stopped by a big, strong hand gripping my shoulder tightly. I wouldn't do that if I were you, a deep voice said from behind me, and I realized that the black guy had anticipated my move and stepped forward to prevent it. He took his hand away. I snapped, trying unsuccessfully to throw him off. At that moment, all four guys turned to me, looking at me and preparing for trouble. Leave him alone, Carrie told them before anything happened. He bought me for the night. He's fine. He won't cause any problems. And all this without a single glance at me or any recognition. Her head turned in my direction for a moment, but our eyes never met. Did I buy it? No mention of the fact that I've known her since childhood and that I'm her damn husband. Don't move, dude, the big black guy told me, and there was a clear threat in his voice. He let go of my shoulder, but pushed me away from the group of people surrounding Carrie, putting his huge body between them and me. I couldn't believe what was happening. An icy lump formed inside me. 20 minutes ago, I was walking hand in hand with my loving wife through the center of Leeds, almost jumping for joy, in love as much as a loving couple can be in love. And in just 20 short minutes, he was pushed to the side of the road and separated from his wife by her friends. They moved to one of the tables as the pub became crowded. I saw several attractive, albeit slutty-looking women come in and talk to Carl or his buddy before leaving again or taking their place at the counter. I wasn't a fool not to understand what kind of women they were. Or, to be more precise, what they do for a living. Damn it. My rather prim and correct young wife was very friendly with the pimp. Exactly. Carl was definitely a fucking pimp. Surely she wasn't so simple-minded as not to understand what was going on around her. Enough. Whether she liked it or not, Carrie and I were going to leave there. Carrie, I called out loud enough that she couldn't pretend not to hear. We have to go, Carrie. Now come on. It's time for us to leave. She looked at me, and the smile disappeared from her face, replaced by an excited expression. She didn't even say no. She didn't say anything at all. Carrie just shook her head and turned to her friends. The smile returned, and soon she was giggling like a schoolgirl, apparently forgetting that I was even here. Behave calmly or fuck off, said a deep voice from the side. I won't warn you anymore. Listen. I started to protest, but he put his huge hand on me and decisively pushed me away from the group sitting at the table, back to the bar. The lady doesn't seem to want to know you, buddy, he informed me. Stay there and wait for her if you want, or go home. Go and find yourself another companion for the night. Or better yet, contact one of our ladies. Without waiting for me to say anything, he called one of the women over to him, and she immediately responded by running up on her high heels and standing next to me. This is Sally, he told me. It's going to cost you money, but she'll look after you today. Just fuck off with her and forget about that little lady. She and Carl have a lot of catching up to do. I'm sorry if your date didn't go the way you expected today, but that's life. He stepped back and returned to the table, leaving me speechless with rage. Don't push your luck, handsome, Sally advised me. It's better not to mess with this couple. Just let her go. She's cute, of course, but you'd better find yourself another girlfriend for the night. I looked at her incredulously. What a fucking girlfriend. She's my wife. I hissed at her. Damn it, Sally exclaimed, and her face clouded. Oh, that sucks. It really sucks. I started back to the table, but this time Sally blocked my way. Stop, handsome, she told me. You'd better not do that. What should I do? I asked in desperation. Let me go and talk to her instead of you, she suggested. You're not kidding me, are you? Is she really your wife? One look at my face was enough to convince her, and raising her palm in my direction to make sure that I would not follow her, she slowly walked to the table where Carrie and the others were sitting. I watched as she bent down and whispered something in Carrie's ear, and then Carrie raised her head, and for the first time since she entered the pub, her eyes met mine. When she looked at me, there was almost surprise in her gaze. It's like she really just remembered that I'm here. She looked away, embarrassed, and then whispered something back to Sally. She said she'd be with you in a minute, Sally said when she returned to me. In a minute? In a minute, damn it, I shouted. I want her here immediately. Don't push your luck, mister, was all she said in response, and then went to try her luck with another customer at the other end of the bar. I stood there in a rage, unable to take my eyes off Carrie for a minute. At least she looked back at me a few times, giving me a faint smile. I started counting the minutes, wondering at what point I would explode, but after 5 minutes she stood up and apologized, but did not come to me right away. Instead, Carrie headed for the toilets and disappeared through the door. I didn't know if she wanted me to follow her or not. I didn't know what the hell to do, but before I could make a decision, she came out again and, after glancing at Carl's group, headed towards me. What kind of game are you playing, Carrie? I asked angrily. We're leaving, and immediately. I tried to grab her hand, but she pushed me away and backed away. Don't make a scene, Terry, she spat at me. You can go if you want, but I'll stay here for a while. What? You heard me, Terry, Carrie told me firmly. I'm going to stay here for a while to chat with my old friends. You can leave and come back for me later, or you can stay here and wait. I looked at her in disbelief. The woman who told me several times that day how much she loved me told me to fuck off. It's better if you just go home, Terry, she continued when I didn't answer. I'll take a taxi back. We'll talk about it later. I'm not fucking leaving you here, Carrie, I exclaimed. I was ready to burst into tears. Then just stay and watch, Terry, if that's what you want, she replied humbly. You may not like what you see, but for your own sake, don't interfere. I tried again to persuade her to leave with me, but she wouldn't listen. Terry, you'd better go, she suggested. See you later. Don't worry, honey, Everything will be fine later. I love you and I will make it up to you, I promise. Just give me this evening and everything will be as before. Carrie tried to move away, but I grabbed her arm and pulled her back, startled by her outrageous behavior. I didn't even notice him coming over. Before I knew it, I was pressed back against the bar, and a big black guy pushed my hand away from my wife and me with it. I'm not a weakling, so I took a swing at him, but I might as well have tried to knock down Nelson's column. He pushed me further along the bar and then knocked me to the floor. I warned you, you stupid little bastard, he reminded me with a nasty grin on his face. Then he picked me up like a piece of fluff and pushed me towards the door. Don't touch him, Ted, Carrie screamed. He won't do any harm. I don't know if her pleading had any effect on the result, but at least I think she tried. The next moment I was on the street and doubled over when he hit me in the stomach and then staggered back from the blow. It was like being hit by a train, and I fell on my back, waiting for the beating to continue. This did not happen. I lay there for a long time, wondering how the hell I got here. 2 punches, just 2 punches, and I turned into a wreck. My whole body hurt, and I still couldn't get up. 10 more minutes and I was able to get to my feet, brushing the dust and dirt off my clothes. How could an evening that started so wonderfully go so far? And it happened again. I just didn't know what the hell to do. I'm not a weakling, but how could I stand up to such a big guy? He's going to kill me. I've never felt so humiliated and hopeless in my life. I turned out to be a strange hero. I didn't even know anyone in Leeds. I didn't have any friends I could call and ask for help. I stood there and watched the slow stream of customers coming in and out of the pub. A lot of guys went in there and then went out arm in arm with one of the women. The pub was a fucking brothel. My wife and I have lived with her for 6 years, and just this morning we discussed the possibility of having children, but she was in a fucking brothel. She took me there and knew where she was going. I fought back tears and realized what I had to do. I couldn't leave her there. I didn't know what would happen to us next, but I couldn't leave her. If she doesn't come home with me this time, then maybe our wonderful, perfect marriage will come to an end. I think it took over an hour before I could pack up and go back to the pub. I didn't know what to expect. I definitely didn't expect what I was facing. I think you could describe it as an impromptu lesbian striptease, or something like that. No, I couldn't stand it. I rushed forward, pushing through the crowd of other men, and grabbed Carrie, who looked back at me in fright. Oh, no, Terry, for God's sake, no, was all she managed to say. I wasn't doing any better than the last time, and I passed out when someone hit me hard in the face. The second time I was treated much more rudely, and it was only a few hours later that I fully recovered in the middle of the parking lot near the pub. Everything hurt, but I think they were professionals, and even though it hurt, it didn't seem like anything was broken. It took me an hour to find my way to our car, and another hour before I could start it up and drive back to our new rented apartment. I fell asleep on the couch, not knowing, and by then no longer caring what time Carrie would be home. The next morning I woke up feeling worse than death. I stood under a hot shower for a long time until I felt that my body belonged to me again. I dressed slowly, trying not to think about last night, but I just couldn't stop. I didn't know which was stronger, the pain in my body or the pain in my soul. Is my marriage over? I had no idea, but it seemed quite likely. For the life of me, I couldn't figure out what had happened. How could my loving wife Carrie do this? I've known her all these years, but obviously not as well as I thought. 11 o'clock in the morning, and where the hell was she? Damn me if I was going to go back there to find her. Another hour passed, and still there was no news. I was rushing around the room, not knowing what to do. I'll be damned if I'm going to look for her. And then the phone rang. It was connected only the day before, and unless it was the double-glazed window salesman we called, the only person besides me who had this number was my dear wife. Hi, I replied, picking up the phone. Hi, honey, she replied softly. Are you all right? What do you think, Carrie? I asked her. Oh, Terry, I'm so sorry about last night. I should have known better than to go back to that damn pub. Where are you now? I demanded an answer. Still in the pub. I'm ready to leave, Terry. Do you want to pick me up, or should I call a taxi? I ignored her question. So who did you sleep with last night, my dear wife? I asked sarcastically, but she didn't answer. And you didn't have to answer, right? Or the whole pub was using you, Carrie, wasn't it? No, Carrie said quickly. Terry, don't be stupid. There was only one. She didn't finish her sentence. Suddenly it dawned on her what she was going to say. We were both silent for a few minutes, although I could hear her sobbing on the other end of the line. Please, Terry, please understand why I did what I did. Please let me come back to your house and let everything be as it was before. I can explain everything, if you'll just let me. Just give me a chance. I desperately wanted to tell her to fuck off. But one way or another, it had to be dealt with. You'll get home on your own, I told her. Or ask one of your lovers to take you back. Oh, thanks, Terry, Carrie croaked. I'll be back in half an hour at most. Everything will be fine, you'll see. Everything will be fine. I hung up before she could say anything else. Damn it. I loved her and hated her at the same time. What the hell am I going to tell her when she gets back? Will I tell her to pack her things, or will I hug her? As it turned out, I didn't have to make that decision. Half an hour passed, then an hour. The day turned into evening, and my unfaithful wife was still not in sight. By 8 o'clock in the evening, it became clear that she was not going to return home. Anyway, not on this night, but for me it meant that maybe not on any night in the future. I was getting angrier and angrier by the hour. Not the screams and screams, but the cold, calculating rage that consumed me. I loaded some things into the car and drove very carefully back to the city center, hoping that I could find the pub Carrie had taken me to the night before again. After a bit of hesitation, I eventually recognized a large factory, and a little further down the road was the Rose and Crown pub. Parking the car right around the corner, I got out and headed for the bar, outwardly confident, but inside my heart was pounding wildly. I have to admit, I was nervous and even physically scared after what they did to me last night. I hesitated at the front door, not knowing what to expect. I wasn't even sure if Carrie was still there. I pushed open the door and went in. Everything was almost the same as before. It was full of rude-looking individuals and even rougher-looking women. I recognized several faces, and some of them seemed surprised to see me. If they weren't sure it was me, the bruise under my eye and the abrasions on my face dispelled their doubts. Wasn't it enough for you, dude? The bartender asked, noticing me. Where's my wife, asshole? I demanded an answer. At least he had the decency to feign surprise. Your wife? He grimaced questioningly. Is Carrie your wife? I nodded in the affirmative. Damn it, he said. She told us that you just took it off. The bartender looked at me with some sympathy, remembering what had happened last night, and maybe even more since I'd been kicked out. He knew there would be trouble. He didn't know which ones, but he knew they would be. He cocked his head to the side, pointing to the far corner. When I looked back, she, Carrie, was sitting on Carl's lap. None of them noticed me coming in, and I walked up to them before they noticed my presence. Carl just gave me that smile when you know you've got the better of someone. It's been a long half hour, Carrie, I told her. Did something hold you up? Carrie didn't say anything, just stared at me in shock. I'll send her to your house when I'm ready and satisfied. Well, at least he seemed to know she was my wife. Please, Terry, Carrie whispered, finally finding her voice. I will definitely come home later. I promise you that I will come back, and everything will be just fine. Carl laughed and pinched her left nipple, teasing me more than her. You'll leave when I say you can, he said, keeping his eyes on me to gauge my reaction. Last chance, Carrie, I told her, ignoring his taunts. It's now or never. I thought about it a lot afterwards, and it seems to me that if she had come with me, chosen me over him, then I would have tried to sort everything out. Maybe we could forget about what happened so far. I wasn't sure, but maybe. She looked at me piteously, indecision written on her face. Her eyes, her beautiful brown eyes, spoke for themselves. She knew how much she had offended me, but instead of doing what she had to do, she was calculating what else she could get away with. How far can she go to get me to come back for more? Please, Terry, be reasonable, Carrie finally whispered. And I realized that she had failed me again, and everything was over between us forever. You know how much I wanted to see my old friends again and relive the old student days for the last time. Bear with me a little longer until I finish my last affair, and I promise you that everything will return to normal. I really love you, honey, and I promise I'll make it up to you. She looked at me pleadingly, her eyes begging me to agree. But I didn't say anything because I had nothing else to say. Carrie wanted to tell me something else, but Carl got tired of it too. He squeezed the nipple he had been playing with even harder, and her words turned into a sigh. That's all. I had all the information I needed. My wife was going to come home anyway, but I'll have to wait until tomorrow, or maybe the day after tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Great, just great, isn't it? I noticed that the Jamaican was approaching me, so I raised my hands and stepped back. There's no point getting into a one-sided fight with him again. The whole bar was quiet, waiting for what would happen, but as far as I understood, nothing happened. At least not right away. I'll see you later, I said quietly. I'm not 14 anymore, Terry, Carrie muttered. Even her face fell when she saw how it hurt me. She was my only favorite in all these years, and she threw it in my face. I'm sorry, Terry, she began. I really didn't mean that. But I ignored her, ignoring her rambling apologies. As I backed away to the door, Carl laughed out loud again and pulled off her blouse, and then climbed under her skirt, right in front of my eyes, to rub my suffering in my face. Perhaps it was because of this that tears rolled down her cheeks, but for some reason I doubted it. I think she still loved me in her own way, and seeing me humiliated again would be too much. That's what I wanted to think anyway. As soon as I closed the door behind me, the silence in the pub stopped. Everyone started talking and laughing at the same time. They probably thought it was the last time they'd see me. Slowly returning to the car, I opened the trunk and took out the things that I had put there before leaving the house. To anyone watching me, it would seem that I was calm and relaxed, whereas in fact everything was boiling inside me. I was terrified of what I was going to do, and I did not know how it would turn out. I had a license for a 12-gauge Browning vertical rifle. By that time, I had been doing skeet shooting for several years, and although I had not become a master, it would be enough for what I had in mind. I chose some shotgun shells because I didn't want to end up in jail on a murder charge. I broke the gun and inserted 2 cartridges and put the rest in my jacket pocket. A few moments later, I was back at the entrance to the pub and looking at the 2 large stained glass windows. This will wake them up, I thought, and my heart started pounding wildly under my jacket. It wasn't me. It just wasn't me. But what else could I do? There was no point in going back and arguing with her, since she wouldn't agree, and I would probably get another beating. What would I do if I just went home? Did you wait for her to come back to me and discuss how we could deal with what she did? How she humiliated me? No way in hell. By this time it had already gone too far, and I wasn't going to take any more shit from any of them. Aiming at the first window I saw, I pulled the trigger. My hand was shaking, even shaking, and the barrel of the shotgun was spinning uncertainly as I tried to control my nerves. It didn't really matter, since I was only 4 or 5 meters from the window. I pulled the trigger harder and resisted the urge to close my eyes. There was a crash, and a moment later the entire window shattered into pieces, turning into a spinning mass of broken glass. With renewed confidence, I aimed at the second window, fired the second barrel, and the second window followed the example of the first. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the surrounding buildings and mixed with the sound of falling glass. It sounded much louder than ever before when I was shooting in an open field. I calmly took 2 more cartridges out of my pocket and loaded them into the gun. Then I waited to see what would happen. I had no idea how they would react, and I almost hoped they wouldn't. But I was ready, absolutely ready to show them that they had made a big mistake if they thought I was weak, and I accepted what they had done to me. The doors swung open and several guys poured out. They froze when they saw me with a gun. No one moved. Then Carl came out, followed by his big black henchman. "Stupid fucking bastard," he shouted and rushed at me, perhaps thinking that I hadn't thought to reload my weapon. Or maybe he wasn't thinking at all. I took careful aim, somewhere in the area of his knees, as I didn't want to risk actually killing him, and pulled the trigger. I was calm as a boa constrictor, even managed to notice that my hands were no longer shaking, and that the barrel was pointed exactly where I was aiming. Time seemed to slow down. I had all the time in the world. I could see quite clearly how his expression changed from rage to horror when he realized that he had mistaken me. Or maybe I got the same grin on my face that he had a few moments before. Remember, this is when you realize that you really got the better of someone. Bang! He fell down screaming. I was even surprised to see what a mess his legs had become. The black guy didn't even hesitate. I'm not sure if he had the guts or the brains, but he didn't stop. At least, until the second charge hit his legs and knocked him down. They were both lying on the ground. Carl was screaming, and Black Ted was moaning loudly. I didn't even bother to reload my gun that time, as I was on edge, but fortunately the rest of the crowd suddenly melted away. Everything went relatively calm, considering how much noise two wounded people can make. It wasn't far to the car, although my legs were so weak that I was afraid of falling. The gun returned to the trunk. I started the engine and drove home. I drove slowly and very carefully. I thought about going into the pub to scare Carrie to death, but I couldn't. I didn't trust myself, and to be honest, what I just did horrified me. But I did it anyway. I did it damn well, as I promised myself, but I've had enough. Strangely enough, I slept well that night and woke up completely rested. The black eye and bruises on his face were still there, but otherwise everything was fine. I wondered who would come first, Carrie or the police, to arrest me. I hadn't even put the shotgun away, and it was still in the trunk of my car. As it turned out, Carrie was not destined to appear. Around 10 o'clock, I got a call asking if I was Carrie Belling's husband. Yes, I replied, wondering what was the matter. It was the police. I rather expected them to come arrest me that morning, rather than call me about Carrie. I'm sorry, sir, but she's under arrest at the station. Could you come and pick her up, please? Under arrest? I asked with genuine surprise. For what, for God's sake? For prostitution, sir, he replied. She was taken last night along with a group of other working girls after a shootout on the outskirts of the city. Oh no, so that's what it's about, I replied. And I was wondering where the hell she was. Hanging around for days, coming home whenever she wanted. I understand, sir, the policeman replied grimly. I'm sorry that you had to find out this way. You'd be surprised how often this happens. I think my comment sealed her fate. Apparently, at first they thought they were wrong about her, because she was a little higher class than other women. And when I refused to come and pick her up, it probably made the situation even worse. She was brought to justice and found guilty. She lost her new job, and it would be very difficult for her to find another one. Young graduates with a criminal record for prostitution are not in high demand in most firms. The police didn't even ask if I had a shotgun. My gun was registered to me quite legally in Bedford, where we had just moved from, but they didn't even bother to check. I wasn't a suspect in any way, so why would they do that? But why no one from the pub was following me, I had no idea. Carrie tried to contact me over and over again. I never met her, but eventually took one of her calls when she was getting more and more desperate. She told me she still loved me, and it was all just plain nonsense. I think she really loved me, and obviously she was heartbroken that I didn't want to take her back. I refused to even discuss it, and she didn't insist, clearly afraid of me after I solved our problem so harshly. Carrie, at least, was honest with me when I asked her about Carl and her job at the pub when she was a student. How the hell did you get from working at the bar to what happened last night? I demanded an answer. I said I worked in a pub when I was a student, Carrie replied. But I never said that behind the bar. Oh, damn it. I cannot describe how I felt when I realized the meaning of these words. She worked for that fucking Carl as one of his girlfriends. Now it became clear why he had power over her. Was it good or bad? It's hard to say. It's up to you to judge. But she warned me that Carl would be looking for me to deal with me himself, as soon as he gets back on his feet. Maybe that's why no one from the pub told the police about me, because such people solve their own problems. Of course, he would never have found me. I turned down a job in Leeds, and they realized it after they found out about my wife. But I accepted a job in the Middle East, where I was happily accepted as a bachelor, as it was cheaper than a married couple. That's what we've come to. To my surprise, I got away with it. I really managed to escape punishment, and they blamed everything on a gang fight. I suppose you're wondering what happened to me afterwards. Okay, that's natural. As you may have guessed, I gave up skeet shooting and sold my rifle and took up golf instead. I succeeded in this, and eventually my handicap dropped to 6. I've dated a lot of women, but it's only now that I realized how good my wife Carrie was in bed. Well, she had to be like that, because, after all, she was a professional in love. In every sense of the word. Then I met Angie, a charming American woman I met in Dubai. After that, life became beautiful, really beautiful. I've never been interested in where she got her bed experience, but I really think she was just a talented amateur. Anyway, I hope so. We never got married. She didn't want to, and I, strictly speaking, was still married and still hadn't bothered to get a divorce. I returned to the UK periodically, but I always avoided Leeds until finally, one day, I couldn't resist. One Thursday in June, I drove slowly past the Rose and Crown, hoping that no one would recognize me after all this time. The elegant stained glass windows have been replaced with modern double-glazed windows. It's a pity, really. I really liked them. I sat in the car for a while, and finally, to my surprise, a guy in a wheelchair appeared. He was big and sturdy, but fatter than I remembered Carl. Although, of course, I've only seen him twice, and that was 4 or 5 years ago. Everything was decided by the fact that he was being pushed by a big colored man who limped badly. It could only be Ted. Then several women poured out of the pub to see Carl, maybe to report on customers, which was undoubtedly easier than taking him up 3 steep steps to the bar. They all looked the same as the last time I was there, except for one of them. One of them looked a little different. However, she had a haggard look, and the smile I once loved was no longer visible. She didn't look happy at all, but I didn't stop to make sure. She was, as she said, no longer 14, and she could take care of herself. It's strange how things turn out, isn't it? If only the damn restaurant hadn't been redesigned, maybe she'd be at home with our kids right now, which we'll never have. I wouldn't have found out anything, and maybe we would have lived happily ever after.